Hi there, my name is Marley and welcome to my booktube channel. Today we are doing my April wrap-up where I talk about all the books that I read in the month of April. And I have to be honest, YA books definitely took over this month. I didn't mean for that to happen, but that's just kind of what happened. And to start, before we get into the book reviews, I'm gonna tell you some of my stats for the month. All right, so for the month of April, I read a total of 8 books, which equated to around 2,870 pages, and my average rating was a 3.9, so pretty good. As for my genre breakdown, I read 5 fantasies, 1 romance, 1 thriller, and 1 contemporary. In terms of format, I read 7 physical books and 1 ebook, so still doing good on my goal of reading more from my physical TBR. As for audience, we had 6 YA books, 1 adult, and 1 that I categorized as children's. For author gender, for the second month in a row, we had only female authors that I read from, and all of these authors I have already read from before. There were no new to me authors. In terms of year published, they were kind of all over the place. We had 2 that came out last year in 2022, 1 from 2021, 2 from 2019, 1 from 2018, 1 from 2016, and then 1 from 1999. So kind of all over with that. Now let's get into the book reviews. As always, I'm going to talk about the books in the order of the lowest rated to the highest rated. So that means we're starting out with Before Night Breaks by Janella. Unfortunately, this was my least favorite book of the month, and it was also the last book that I read this month. It actually took me like the whole last week of April to read this, and all of these other books I read during the first 3 weeks. So this one was really a slog for me. Unfortunately, it is the sequel to Where Dreams Descend, and it is actually the conclusion to the series called the, Kingdom of Cards duology. I quite liked the first book. I gave it 4 stars. It really stayed on my mind. I loved the vibes, but unfortunately this one just didn't have that same spark as the first one, which I feel bad because in the author's note she actually wrote about how it was really hard for her to write this, and she wrote it during the pandemic and stuff like that. So I feel bad, but yeah, I did only give this a 3-star rating. Not the best, not the worst. If you don't know, like the initial premise of this series was that we were following this girl, Kalia, who was a magician at this like club that was kind of hidden away in the woods, and she was kind of like a prisoner there. And then she runs away and enters this magical competition to try and prove herself. And there aren't many like female magicians in this world, so she kind of has the odds stacked against her. She meets this other mysterious magician named Marco, and they end up having a bit of a romance. But there still is this figure that is haunting her from her past, and so that's why there are a lot of Phantom of the Opera vibes. It gets compared to that a lot. Definitely gave me Moulin Rouge vibes. I compared it to Caraval in the past, that book series. I just really loved so much about it. Unfortunately, in the second book, our main characters, some of them are separated for most of this book, which was a bit of a downer. It was great once they finally got together at the end of the book. The end of the book was definitely more enjoyable for me, but having those characters that we grew to love seeing together be separated for so much of the story made the book really drag for me. And also, I don't want to spoil anything, but one of our characters is in a completely different setting from the first book, and it was just not a setting that I enjoyed as much. I also do feel like I read this during maybe not the best time, like for my mental place. It is funny how if you're not in as good of a mental place reading a book, you won't enjoy it as much. So I don't want to put it all on to this book, but I feel like I just was not grasping it. I was not having very good comprehensive skills when reading this. It was not comprehending. I was not fully understanding everything that was happening. So I don't know if that's the book's fault or my fault for not being able to concentrate, but yeah, unfortunately this wasn't the best reading experience for me. I would still recommend the first one, but then it has a cliffhanger. But yeah, I'm still interested to see more of what this author can do because I did really like the first book in the duology. Next up, we have Nothing More to Tell by Karen M. Mcmanus, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. This is a YA thriller from the very popular Karen M. Mcmanus. She's mostly known for her her One of Us is Lying series, and then she has a few other standalones such as this that are out. I would consider her books just very middle of the road, and probably good for more like beginner readers, beginner thriller readers, because they never do too much. They're never too crazy. I always have a pretty enjoyable time reading them, but they are definitely not mind-blowing to me. And I read lots of YA thrillers, so there definitely are good ones out there. But yeah, hers are pretty middle of the road. This one in particular is following this main character who is interning for this true crime podcast. So she hopped on the true crime podcast kind of bandwagon that so many thrillers do. Unfortunately, she did not really take advantage of that. I feel like it was just kind of thrown in there so they could put it in the synopsis, but she really barely ever was working for this podcast. But the reason she gets the job is that she brings this interesting case to them about her teacher from the 8th grade who had been murdered, and the killer was never found. In fact, 3 of her classmates were the ones that found the body. They all never really gave much info to the police, and the case was just never solved. So she is kind of reinvestigating that. We're also following one of the boys who had found the body, who of course is a bit of a love interest for her, as they used to be friends and used to have a crush on each other. So we have that kind of second chance romance going on. And we're also seeing his point of view and kind of his perspective on what it was like finding the body. And he is a little bit suspicious, as you can imagine. All of these 3 characters kind of are, as being the ones that found the body in the woods. Now, the killer, I'll say, I did not guess who it was. Unfortunately, though, I feel like there were other things about the book that were predictable, and I didn't really love the payoff when we found out who the killer was. I didn't overly think that it made sense. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about this one. Then we have You Have a Match by Emma Lord. I gave this one a 3.5 star rating as well, although honestly, I feel like I could have given it a higher rating, but I just didn't. This is a YA contemporary book from the author of Tweet Cute, which I really liked, and that's why I wanted to read more from her. It's following a girl who finds out she has a secret long-lost sister when she does this DNA kit to find out more about herself. Yeah, she finds this long lost sister that her parents had put up for adoption or whatever before she was born. And so they come up with this plan to go to this summer camp together, giving a little bit of Parent Trap vibes, I guess. But they go to this camp to try and bond, as well as figure out what happened back in the day between their parents. Both of them have love interests as well. There's some cute romance stuff going on. I'll admit at first I wasn't loving it because it is friends to lovers, which I do like, but it has to be done the right way. But then as the book went on, I actually did quite like those romances. So if you like friends to lovers, I would recommend this. If you like fun camp stories, there was some fun camp shenanigans. I have to say, it was a fun setting. Our main character was fun because she wasn't one of those characters that was like a goody two shoes, not like afraid to break the rules. Like she was breaking the rules, and she was being a bit of like a rebellious person at the camp. So that was a fun dynamic. And then her sister is the one that's more of the uptight one. So seeing that dynamic between them was fun. As with all YA books, I just feel like there's so much cringe that I'm just super aware of. Like sometimes I read books and I'm like, there's no way teenagers would relate to these references. Like I'm pretty sure it was this one that had a lot of Harry Potter references still, which I guess people can still relate to, but they're definitely just, it's always like outdated references when there's an adult rating YA. I don't know, I just can't help but notice it. Just typical kind of dumb YA things, like why didn't they just ask their parents what happened? Like I know it's like, ooh, it's parents, like ew when you're a teenager, but I'm like, they could have just asked. Like instead of trying to figure it out. I don't know. Still pretty cute though. I think I would like to read more from Emma Lord as well. Next up, we actually have 3 books, which I'll talk about all together. In case you didn't see, I read, oh, that's the wrong one. The Folk of the Air, aka the Cruel Prince trilogy this month, and I actually vlogged it, so you can go watch that vlog if you want. It's spoiler free. You can see my in-depth thoughts as I'm reading them. And I did that because this is a highly anticipated series for me to read, so I was really excited to get to it finally. But yeah, I binged this series. I had a really fun time. I ended up rating the first one 4 stars, the second one 4.5 stars, and it would actually probably be my favorite book of the month, but we're just going to talk about it now. And then the final book I also gave 4 stars. So the second one was my favorite. If you don't know what this is about, we're following a main character, Jude, who when she was younger was brought to the fairy realm when basically a fairy came and like murdered her parents and then like took her and her sisters to this world. So she grew up in the fairy world, Elfheim. And Jude was a very interesting character to read about. You know, she's not really like, poor me, I wish I was back in the human world, like trying to escape. She really embraces being in this fairy world and being sly and kind of conniving and fitting in with these fairies, which was very interesting. She was a really morally gray character, whereas I feel like in most YA fantasies, it's very clear that like our main character is good and then, you know, the antagonist is evil, but our main character is just such a good person. Like, I like that it didn't fall into that trope. But anyways, because she's a human, she's able to lie. So she gets recruited by one of the princes of this kingdom to be his spy. And that's how she gets wrapped up in this. It has a lot of like royal court politics. If you are into that sort of thing. Normally I'm not really, but I feel like this series did it in a very like fun and digestible way. There's multiple, you know, princes vying for this throne, one of them being Cardan, who is the cruel prince, who is Jude's love interest. I also found them to be a very unique couple. Again, most YA fantasies have those couples that, you know, just are destined to be together, and like by the end of the first book they're together, and basically in the other books it's just them kind of working together. But in this, they are very enemies to lovers, kind of bully romance to start, and they are always kind of battling with each other and not totally getting along. And at times, I will say I wish that we got more of them being together and more kind of lovey-dovey moments. That is one of my critiques. But at the end of the day, I do just love hate to love, and I love a slow burn romance. So this whole series and this whole relationship really did work for me. I just do wish there was more Cardan in the series because I really loved him as a character. I also just loved this world. I've been reading a lot of Sarah J. Maas fairies recently, and I just feel like her fairies are so different from most of the other fairy books that I have read. She goes away from a lot of the lore and kind of creates her own, which good for her, I guess. But I just liked reading about more of a traditional fairy story that stuck with a lot of that lore and just felt more authentic to fairies. So if you're someone who is not into the SJM fairies, like definitely check this one out. As I said, I think it's pretty unique for a YA series. I found it very easy to read. They're very quick. Actually, each book gets shorter as the series goes on, which is another critique I had. I just think they should have been longer. There's so much more we could have done, but because of that, it is very fast-paced and quick to get through. I'm guessing that Holly Black had pressure on her to come up with these books quick because they were so successful, which is a shame, but I'm just really looking forward to reading more from Holly Black now. I did read her previous fairy series back when I was in 8th grade, and now after reading this, I just want to read more from her. So yeah, I'm continuing to hype these up along with everyone else who has been for years. Now, I don't overly want to speak about this too much as I do not agree with some of the things this author has said and stands for, but I did read the second book in the Harry Potter series, The Chamber of Secrets, and I did also give this a 4.5 rating. I had a really fun time with this, but I have to say, and I said this about the first one too, it's literally a copy and paste of the movie, which I know the movie came after this, but I grew up watching the movies and I had never read the books. So it's been really interesting going back and reading the books now when I know the movies so well. And this one was really, really close to the movie. So good on the, screenwriter and director and everything who made these first 2 movies because they are so similar to these books. I did really enjoy this book because I do really enjoy the Chamber of Secrets movie. Like, it's one of the best ones in the series in my opinion, but because I know the movie so well, it just is making these books like a little bit boring sometimes because I know what's gonna happen. I'm like, some of it is just literally word for word, scene for scene, that it's taking away from the experience a little bit. I love Tom Riddle. Wish we saw more of him. But yeah, overall having a fun time with this series. Looking forward to reading Prisoner of Azkaban as that is my favorite movie. One of my favorite movies of all time, actually. And finally, one of the other books I really loved reading this month was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was my book club book with my friends. Basically, we came off of reading Carrie Soto and just wanted to keep reading from Taylor Jenkins Reid. We love her. So I have been keeping up with all of her books that are in the McRiva universe, but I hadn't touched any of her backlist until this one. And because it was made into a movie, I wanted to read it. Still haven't watched the movie yet, but basically this one has a really tragic, honestly, concept, but I was obsessed with it. So we have our main character, and in the very beginning of the book, like first page, it's like, I was at dinner with my fiance when my husband called. Like, what? So basically this girl like married this man that was like her high school sweetheart, and then he died in this helicopter accident. She took a few years to grieve, you know, figured he was dead like everyone else. And so she moves on and gets married to this other man. And then her husband is saved, is found. He didn't actually die. Like, can you imagine? So I was immediately just engrossed in this story. I was like, what is gonna happen? Like, who is she gonna end up with? If you are into these types of stories and this drama and like this pain and this angst, you gotta read this. You gotta read this. By the end, I was sobbing. I was crying. And I don't cry that often in books. I feel like normally I read them so quick that I'm like, it's barely even sinking in sometimes. But this one, I was like, this is so beautiful and so heartbreaking. I gave it a 4.5. I know the way I'm talking sounds like it would be a 5, but I don't know. There's just something a little bit off for me. I think it's the fact that this was the book that came out in 2016, which isn't that long ago, but I got a little bit of like an outdated vibe, kind of. And I don't know, I think her more recent books are even better because they're dealing with all this intense, interesting relationship stuff in these really cool settings. This was dealing with that stuff, but in a very like normal setting. So it's just not as elevated as her other books, but I really did love it. Won't say my opinions on who she ends up with and the men because I don't want to spoil, but I will say she's really good at manipulating you along the way and making you feel what you're supposed to feel at each moment of the main character's life. Now I'm forgetting her name, sorry. And it was just so well done. So if you have not got to her backlist books, I would at least recommend this one. I'm interested to read her other ones too. If you've read her other backlist books, let me know which ones I should get to first. But yeah, that is all for this wrap up, I think. As always, let me know any thoughts in the comments if you read any of these books. And be sure to subscribe if you've not already. And follow me on Instagram and Goodreads to see what I'm reading throughout the month between these wrap ups. And yeah, just thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you next time. Bye.